you see that if it ranges from 0 to 1. 0 means that everybody takes the top route, right? And then 1 means everybody takes the bottom route. And so we look at this plot, and we look at the minimum, and the minimum happens at a half, right? So from the social planner's perspective, they would much prefer half the people took the top route and half the people took the bottom route, right? And then what kind of total cost do you have there? You have half the vehicles taking the top route, they experience a delay of 1, and half the vehicles taking the bottom route, and they experience a delay of 1. If you did the math here, you should get 3/4, right? So the total network delay is now 3/4, which is better than our delay of 1, which we saw in the user in the word drop equilibrium case, right? So the social planner has a cost of 3/4. The word drop equilibrium has a cost of 1. And I want to point out some sort of interesting things going on here. So notice that in the first case, the word drop equilibrium case, everybody experienced a cost of 1, right? Notice that in the social planner's case, in the social optimum case, some people experience a delay of 1, some people experience a delay of a half, but nobody's actually worse off than they were in the word drop equilibrium, right? So there's sort of sometimes this common misconception that when the social planners playing this game, they're making life worse for some people in the network at the, to make it better for some other people, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. This is an example where a social planner could make it no worse for everybody and actually make it strictly better for half the people in the network, right? Nonetheless, if you let people do this, and even if you told them, hey, I prefer you to take the bottom route, and they all did this one day, they're going to say, look, that was a raw deal. Tomorrow, I'm just going to take the bottom route. I'll be better off if I take the bottom route, right? So even if you told people this is what would be best, and that some people are going to do better in this case, you wouldn't be able to convince people to do that, right? And that's sort of the nature of a word drop equilibrium, that in the real world, people are going to kind of move around until they get to this user equilibrium point, this word drop equilibrium, right? Okay, so this is Peugeot's network. It's sort of a famous classical example of what happens in networks. Let me introduce this sort of interesting concept called price of anarchy, which is a term that was introduced not that long ago. I think it's only been about 10 or 15 years. It's kind of a fun name for this problem. So we call it the price of anarchy, and it's the ratio of the worst case delay with selfish routing to the best case delay with optimal routing, right? So on the top, you put the total delay that the network experiences when you lead people to their own devices, and they find a word drop equilibrium in the denominator, what you could possibly achieve as a planner in this system. So let's look at Peugeot's network. If you compute the price of anarchy in this network, let's see. So the worst case delay we saw at word drop was 1. The best case delay we could get was 3/4. So this gives us a price of anarchy of 4/3. Price of anarchy is always greater than or equal to 1, right? So you can always, as a social planner, you could choose to do the word drop equilibrium, but you couldn't at least. So that's the worst case scenario for you, and you could, of course, sometimes do better. And in this case, you could do better, right? So it's 4/3, right? I like this name because it sort of evokes this image of people driving recklessly, trying as fast as they can to get from point A to point B without regards for the law or the rules of the road. But anyway, so this is the price of anarchy. There's a theorem, a famous theorem, that also is not too old, that basically this is as bad as it gets. So Peugeot's example is a very simple network, but pick the most complex network you can imagine, and for a particular class, albeit of cost functions, affine in flow, this is the worst you can get for price of anarchy. Other bounds exist if you want to get more exotic with your cost functions, but this is probably the most famous bound on this, is that choose as many origins and destinations as you want, make these cost functions as kind of, crazy as you want, so long as they're affine in flow. The worst case price of anarchy you're going to find in these networks is 4/3. Proof is super slick, only a few lines, and it's kind of a nice geometric argument, but it's a cool result, right? So, and in some sense, as a traffic planner, yeah.
Just a quick question. So this is in terms of the distance or time or both? Could be both.
Yeah, so you could combine both of these things into your cost function. But yeah, very good. So you should ask yourself, okay, affine means that the cost increases linearly with the flow. Is that a good model? Probably not. You should probably get a better model, and in that case, you can get kind of different price of anarchies and more refined price of anarchies. But let's just do the affine cost and think about what happens there. And so yes, you could have a fixed delay, and then you could have sort of a linearly increasing delay based on how many people are on that link. but at worst case 4/3. So the message as a traffic planner should be like, okay, yes, it's possible that when I have people moving around on the traffic network, they are not doing what's best, but worst case scenario, we're only missing out on, on 33% of the delay, right? We can only do better by, 3 volts or something like this, right? So, so in some sense that's good news, right? It means that when people are left to their own devices, there's only so much damage we can do to the system, okay? So now I want to do a little bit more, and I want to show what we can do. I kind of want to show another paradox, this Brace's paradox. How many people know Brace's paradox? Yeah, so a handful of people do. I love this example. I think this is so cool. So Brace's paradox, when less is more, okay? So here's a slightly more complicated version of Peugeot's example. We now have an origin and a destination. We have 2 routes between our origin and our destination. We can take, again, this top route that goes through node A, or we can take this bottom route that goes through node B. In both cases, one of the links has a cost of F and the other link has a cost of 1, but the reverse, right? So in the top route, you would experience the cost of F first and then the cost of 1, and on the bottom route, it's vice versa, right? So from this picture, for the Ward-Drop equilibrium, you can convince yourself one of the Ward-Drop equilibria is to split 50% of the traffic on the top, 50% of the traffic at the bottom. They look identical. The total route cost looks identical, right? From the perspective of a person driving that route, that cost is going to be 1 plus F, right? Or F plus 1, but that's the same, right? So you can convince yourself that at least one Ward-Drop equilibrium is to split the traffic evenly. You can convince yourself actually that that's the only Ward-Drop equilibrium in this network. And in that case, every vehicle in the network is going to experience a delay of 3 halves, right? 1 plus a half. And the total network delay, since everybody's experiencing a delay of 3 halves, that 1 unit times 3 halves gives you a total network delay of 3 halves, right? So that's the network delay in Brace's paradox, okay? But here's why it's a paradox. Suppose you come along and you say, look, it's actually not that hard to build a shortcut from A to B. We can build a road there. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's suppose it's actually so easy to build that route that the cost of that link is 0, no matter how many people get on that link. It's a wide highway. People can get from point A to point B, and it's basically 0 time. Okay? So let's see what happens now. So here's where the paradox comes in. If you think about it, from the perspective of a vehicle, right, they can either, they're here at the origin, they can either go to A or B. If they go to A, they'll experience a cost of F. If they go to B, they'll experience a cost of 1. There's only 1 unit of traffic we're trying to route, so all the way to the top is going to be at least as good as the bottom, usually better, right? So we'll take the top route. Now you have a choice. You can either teleport to node B and then go to node D with cost F, or you can stay at A and go to node D with cost 1. Or you can do the same thing you did at the origin. You're going to teleport to B and take the link with cost F, right? So if you go through this process, what you're going to find is the Ward-Drop equilibrium in this case is to go from origin to A to B to D. All traffic is going to do that. All traffic is going to experience a delay of 2 now, right? But of course, we could, as a social planner, have told everybody to split evenly top and bottom like we did before we even built this road and say, don't use this road, right? And there we could have gotten a delay of 3 halves, right? And so for this network, again, we achieved this price of anarchy of 4/3, right? So that's, and again, so this is sort of the worst case. But I love this example because this is an example where you can actually add links to a network and you can make things worse for everybody involved. Notice that the difference is worse for everybody. Everybody went from having a cost of 3 halves to now everybody having a cost of 2, right? Okay, I'm doing very well on time, so I'm going to break for a moment and kind of digress for a moment, and I want to show, because I love this video. So Brace's paradox shows up in more places than just routing networks. You can build electrical circuits that show Brace's paradox. You can build mechanical circuits that exhibit Brace's paradox. And you can find all kinds of YouTube videos of this, but this is Brace's paradox with springs. And so let me just show you. So this is pretty cool. So okay, so I think it's going to be pretty self-explanatory, but there's 2 springs. Think of those as our 2 roads with cost of F. And think of this link right here as our link of cost 0, right? So here's a mechanical system that's in tension. This rope right here has tension. These are in slack, right? and the bob is here at this point, right? And right now he's going to cut this middle lane, which is like deleting the road, and you're going to see that the bob moves up, and he's going to steady it in a moment, and it'll be higher than it was when it started. Okay. Which I just think is wild. So this is a mechanical system where you let it relax, and there's a string in tension, right? So there's a string that would prefer to be cut, and you cut that string, and somehow the potential and kinetic energy works out where the entire system is now higher than it was when it started, which to me is crazy. Okay? But again, it is exactly Brace's paradox in a mechanical system where a spring has a certain spring constant that gives you an F term, and the strings have sort of these constant Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay. So, sort of enough background. What I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about my research in this area and what we've been doing. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at what happens when we now aren't just trying to route one class of vehicles in this network. We now have two classes of vehicles. One of them are regular vehicles, that's just conventional vehicles, and the other class are autonomous vehicles, right? And presumably autonomous vehicles are going to sort of affect traffic flow, but how are they going to do that? So I'm going to introduce sort of the mathematical equation we're using to define how delay is affected by autonomous vehicles, and then I'm going to show how we can incorporate this into the routing problem. So again, so this is not news to this crowd, but autonomy is already here, right? We see lane keeping. You can buy cars now with lane keeping, adaptive cruise control, automatic parking. Tesla markets something they call autopilot, which has been killing people, but it's they claim it can do remarkable things. And there's sort of this conventional wisdom. Actually, somebody said it at a workshop yesterday morning. I was at this kind of interesting workshop for urban air mobility. It's moving people from point A to point B with air vehicles. And so this person who's not an expert in road vehicles made this comment, just think about it. Imagine how great it would be if everybody was in an autonomous vehicle that was using adaptive cruise control or lead. He said, imagine how much better traffic would be. And I thought, that is not at all the case, right? If you put everybody in a Tesla today, put them all on the road at once, right? Every Tesla would be running their super conservative safety features, and they would most likely bring the system to a much slower condition, right? At least for right away, you can see headlines that do this, right? So Google self-driving car pull over, being too slow. This is about navigation apps, but you can imagine sort of autonomous routing doing something similar, and this is kind of what we're seeing with wardrop equilibrium and things like this, where you end up routing through neighborhoods that never would have been routed before. Uber comes along, maybe with their self-driving version of Uber. Do we now suddenly have a lot more cars on the road than we did before? So I think the point here, the message here, is that autonomy is here, it's coming. There's this sort of conventional wisdom that if we don't do anything about the system, or there's a popular folk wisdom, I guess, that if we don't do anything about the system, our life will improve. And of course, my position is that that is certainly not the case. And it requires researchers like myself and others in the room to figure this out. And that's why we should get paid to do this, right? So that's sort of my position on the matter. And so the question is how can we realize the promise of increased safety in mobility in these systems in sort of a formally correct, or at least kind of a mathematically grounded way. So we're going to look at a kind of one particular version of this. So let's suppose we have an adaptive cruise control in our network, and suppose we have work ethic gains, and so that if you have enough vehicles running adaptive cruise control, you do experience increased throughput, right? So here's some sort of back of the envelope here. Here's a video, first of all, of a sort of adaptive cruise control running on a Subaru, right? So this is sort of part of their marketing material. These technologies already exist. They use radar, and some of the fancier ones might use LiDAR to kind of detect vehicles in front of them, and they maintain sort of these safe gaps and things like this, right? And there's sort of this, if you do the back of the envelope calculation, right, on a single lane on a highway, you might see throughputs somewhere around 2,000 vehicles per hour, right? If you do autonomous cruise control and you maintain, say, that's with like, say, 2-second or more gaps between vehicles. If you bring it down to, say, 0.8 seconds, this is what people have been able to do with technology these days. You could experience maybe as much as 6,000 vehicles per hour on the road if you had all autonomous, right? So people say things like, okay, if you just put all autonomous vehicles on the freeway, you might get 3 times the throughput on this road, right? But what's sort of missing in this puzzle is what happens when you have sort of mixed autonomy. right? And you can imagine it sort of manifesting itself in this way. You can imagine sort of having regular driven cars, or these orange cars, then having like platoons of adaptively cruise controlled vehicles behind them, right? And then you ask yourself, okay, well, how does this affect the throughput of the network? How should we expect this to change the traffic behavior that we experience, right? So what we've done in some of our work is we've just taken this very simple model. We said, okay, let's suppose these vehicles are sprinkled on the road randomly, as some Bernoulli process, right? And let's suppose that these autonomous vehicles, if you have a pair of if you have an autonomous vehicle, it's maintaining a short gap in front of it, and if you have a regular vehicle, it's maintaining, say, a gap that's, say, 3x times the gap that an autonomous vehicle would experience in front of it. What does that do to our throughput as a fraction of a time, right? And so we have a formula for this. We derived it in a paper we wrote. And the details of the formula aren't so important, nor really are the details of the parameters. But the point is that you see this nonlinear relationship, right? So you go from, say, 2,000 vehicles per hour at 0% autonomy up to 6,000 vehicles per hour when we have 100% autonomy, and you have this sort of nonlinear relationship between the two. One kind of interesting thing about this curve is that you actually have increasing benefits as you see more autonomous vehicles on the road, right? So the jump from, say, 0% to 20% isn't that great, but the jump between 60 and 80 is quite large, and the jump between 80 and 100 is even more, right? So there's this kind of interesting observation that at least if we do this correctly, we might actually see benefits increase over time, right? A lot of things, benefits are kind of, they have decreasing marginal benefit, right? But some of these early results are suggesting that in autonomous vehicles we might actually see kind of benefits increase, right? So this is one part of my research where we derive these equations and sort of derive this nonlinear relationship, right? Which tells us that the throughput on a road is now a function of the mix of autonomous vehicles to regular vehicles, okay? Now, another piece of this work we were doing is to join with some folks at UC Santa Barbara, as we were understanding, okay, let's use this new cost function that we've derived. And so we can think of this throughput function as sort of a cost function, right? Or we can at least connect it to a delay function for our links. And now let's return to some of these classical problems in routing and see what happens there, see what kind of things we have. And we have sort of a fun collection of results there. I'm just going to highlight a few of them here in this talk. So the basic message is that if you increase throughput, you should experience decreased delay, okay? And you can sort of derive a precise relationship between the types of throughputs we had on the previous slide and the delay equations we would want to use in these systems, and I'll present that on the next slide, right? And again, the metric we're going to use is this price of the anarchy. We want to know what would be the worst case delay if everybody was acting selfishly, both autonomous vehicles and regular vehicles, and what could be the best case delay if we sort of optimally routed regular vehicles and autonomous vehicles. And sort of the important part here is because delay now is a function of the mix of autonomous and vehicles, autonomous and regular vehicles, we sort of have this extra variable we can play with. We could send regular vehicles differently than we send the autonomous vehicles, right? We can get sort of different mixes of throughputs on the roads, and maybe that different mix does better than we would otherwise, right? And again, just to summarize a bullet on a previous slide, it's well known now for about 15 plus years that the price of the anarchy is known to be bounded by 4/3 if you just have regular vehicles in the network. You don't have any autonomous or smart traffic, right? So let's see what happens in this autonomous world. So again, what we did in this paper and in this research results is we said, okay, let's find the simplest example we can dream up and see what we can do with this simple example. So again, we chose one origin destination, and because I was copying and pasting from multiple slides, there's now a source and a destination, okay? And there's two routes between this source and this destination. The top route has a delay function we'll call it C1, and the bottom route has a delay function we'll call it C2. But sort of the important part here now is this delay is a function of two variables. It's now a function of the number or the flow of regular vehicles and the number and flow of autonomous vehicles, right? So like this xi is our f from the previous slide, but now I want to put x and y because I want to think of autonomous and regular as being two different vehicles. And if we were to try to generalize the cost functions we had in the first part of the talk, this would be the most natural extension, where it's affine in both the number of regular vehicles and the number of autonomous vehicles. And I'm writing it this way for a particular reason, right? So we can picture this cost and we can decompose it as follows. There's some sort of cost as the free flow delay in the network. Then there's some sort of delay per vehicle. And this is sort of like the total vehicles on the network, but we're going to penalize the regular vehicles by some constant k. So there's a delay per vehicle if everybody was autonomous, but if we have sort of this mix of autonomous and regular, we're going to penalize the regular vehicles because we know they sort of hurt our throughput in this nonlinear way. Sort of kind of interestingly, if you take that nonlinear relationship on the previous slide and you just convert it sort of naturally into a delay model by taking the inverse, you get this very nice affine model. So this is a fairly well justified affine model. You could dream up sort of higher order, quadratic, cubic affine models, and we actually have results for those. But let's just kind of go through these affine delay models, right? And now let's write a couple mathematical equations that sort of characterize this optimal routing problem we're trying to solve, and this word equilibrium problem. And again, this is sort of a summary from the previous part of the talk, but now sort of rewritten for our new variables. From the perspective of the social planner, they're trying to minimize the total network cost. So they want to minimize the total vehicles that take the top route times the cost of that top route, plus the total number of vehicles that take the bottom route times the cost of that bottom route, right? But if you're interested in, if you're just interested in yourself, and you're trying to selfishly route, well, you're going to kind of pick and choose between routes until you end up at this equilibrium where the cost of the top route is the same as the cost of the bottom route. That's the only point at which you're going to say, all right, I'll take the route. Otherwise, you're going to keep switching back and forth, right? If there's one road that's cheaper, you'll switch to that road, right? So this is the setup. This is the problem model. So let's do an example. This example is a little bit more complicated than Peugeot's example, so bear with me. So suppose we set the cost on the top road just to be 1, right? Again, this is a very simple example. It fits within the class of cost functions on the previous slide, although maybe it's not so realistic. But let's just do this for the purpose of